Well, good evening and welcome to the Pointbreak Roundtable. This week is a student roundtable, and I am joined by Toni Birner and Cole Peterson, who both actually happen to be seniors this coming year at Klein, Cain. So thank you both for being willing to sit down and have this conversation. But the topic today and the question that we're answering is, what are the difficulties of being a high schooler in 2020? So, I mean, we'll just open it up there. What are the difficulties of being a high schooler in 2020?
Well, I would say first and foremost, and this is probably the first answer for a lot of people, but technology it's moving at such a fast pace. And kids today are really overwhelmed in some ways with that. Mm-hmm. And really the amount of information and stimulus for us as not only younger kids, but also as high schoolers especially, is really overwhelming at times. And sometimes adults might recognize the danger there, but other times they might have no understanding of how much really kids are being exposed to and how dangerous that can be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think technology is like one of the hardest things about being a teenager because, like you were saying, like it's advancing so fast, and it's like we're the first generation that has grown up my entire life. Like I've had an iPhone or like something.
I've said we've talked about this before. I remember when the iPhone was invented, and it was like that one. It was like, oh, that'll never work. But then also it was like, oh, only like certain people are gonna have those. You've grown up in a time where like you've never known the world without it, and it's just completely rapidly progressed since then.
I think the way it's sort of into like technology, and especially iPhones and those mobile devices, they've really integrated themselves into our social constructs and the way we interact with each other. And they've become to a point where if you take it out, it could be catastrophic for some people. That's why you see kids are so attached to their phones. They're everywhere with them because it's such a large source. Yeah, it can become that way. And I think a lot of people might just use them as tools, but I think for the most part, and this applies to young adults, high schoolers, even people who are much older, technology can become very addictive, and it is. And I think it depends on how you see it and whether you're like aware of those dangers. And I think young kids, they don't have an appreciation for how dangerous that could be, and older adults don't either because it's such a new thing. Older adults don't have that experience with the dangers of the addictive qualities of technology. And I think other things that adults, like when it was smoking, like you think about a long time ago, a lot of people smoked. And then probably when in your generation when people were growing up, all the parents and adults, they were saying don't smoke because they were familiar with that and they understood the dangers that they didn't understand before they had done it because it was people weren't aware of these things. And I think today, now I think it's our responsibility as that first generation who's grown up with these things. I think we can now be parents who can properly counsel our kids and younger adults, whether it's as a teacher or a coach or in any of those positions, to properly navigate being a teenager.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't change even more in the next 20, 30 years, which it very well may.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's just like you're saying, like it's such an addiction that it's like Instagram or Snapchat and stuff like that, like it becomes your whole life. Like it's like if I am having the best day of my life, but I don't look good, I'm not gonna post about it. But I could be having the worst day of my life, but if I don't look good in it, if I look good in it, like I'll post it and everyone could look at that and be like, wow, like she has the best life ever. Like I wish I had her life because I've totally been in that place. Like I'll be having a bad day. I'll be sitting in my bed, you know, not looking good in sweatpants or something. And I'll see someone and be like, wow, like I wish I went out and did that. And it's just the way that like since technology is advancing so much, it's also like society's standards are becoming something that is unreachable. And, you know, no one is going to have a perfect life all the time. And it's like when technology is advancing and it becomes an addiction, it's like, it kind of puts you in a little trap, you know? It's so hard.
This is good for I want to highlight a couple of things that you guys are saying right off the bat. When I said, what are the difficulties of being a teenager in 2020, right off the bat, you both were like, hey, technology, which I think some other generations would look and say, oh, that you guys have it the easiest because you grew up in a world where you have everything at your fingertips. But you guys are kind of flipping the script a little bit and saying, hang on, having everything at your fingertips is not always the best. And so to go off of kind of what you were saying, when you're talking about, it kind of even just puts this, I don't know if you use this word or not, but this pressure to convey something. Do you feel like technology, when we talk about Pointbreak being, community, like embrace community, do you feel like technology, and maybe even specifically social media, has made it harder for your generation to be vulnerable than maybe ever before?
I think it can go both ways because, like you were saying earlier, like we're so used to like having like technology that it can be like different for us to have like that social interaction in person. So it's like certain people, like some people I know, will just spend their whole life like kind of in bed on their phone, and they'll be on YouTube and they'll watch people, and that'll be like seems like a friend to them almost. And so, but when they get thrown into the real world, it's almost like I don't know how to communicate in real life, but I know how to online. So it's kind of different for everybody. I've seen it in both ways where that can be like really like beneficial, because I've seen some people, be so vulnerable online, and it gives teenagers a place to like it's like so relatable, and it gives you like a place of comfort knowing like you're not alone. But it can also be so like bad at the same time because you're watching these people and you're so addicted that, now like it's like you're texting most of your conversations. You don't have, like when you're talking in real life, you don't have time to like think about like, what am I gonna say? And it's so raw and it's so like, this is what I really feel. But when you're texting, it's like, like let me think about this. Yeah. And then it can totally change everything. Like the whole conversation, I feel like it can change like the vulnerability because you're giving yourself time. Like, what should I say? What makes me sound cool and stuff like that.
And that's interesting that you say that, because this is really going to give it away for me. I remember when texting was created, and it was called SMS messaging. And and I remember it starting, and honestly, we were all like, that's never going to work. Like, no, why would anybody do that? I was one of those people. Like in high school was when that really like started happening for me. And I was like, no, this is never going to, why would you do that? Like, I would just much rather have a conversation. And I've now shifted in no time at all to I'm texting all day, every day. And it's like, that's kind of what like everybody is doing now. And so when you're talking about technology and how rapidly it's progressing, like I was in high school a while ago, but not that long ago. And already that's shifted. And so you were even talking earlier, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this. You were talking earlier about even just, maybe a difference in y'all's generations from generations before you when it comes to technology. You were even talking about like a little bit of trust and going places and that sort of deal. How that's even become a difficulty for you as a teenager.
Oh yeah, I mean, relatives that I've known, like my uncles, they'd tell me about, we used to just, we'd just go off in the woods and we'd be gone for hours, and then we'd get home. Parents were like, "Oh, where were you?" We were just in the woods, Like, okay, it's time for dinner. But today, parents, they've also, received the world at their fingertips with this technology, and it's enabled them to be a little more protective of their kids. And, in a lot of ways, they don't like the parents don't need to trust us. They can just watch us. They can just keep track of us all the time. So it doesn't really give us the same opportunities to build that trust or to learn those lessons. And in some ways that does keep us safer. And of course, like with everything, there's a trade-off, because parents, they have the right intentions, taking those options away from us when we might have done something that could have led to injuries or something even worse. And it keeps us from bad decisions. But through those bad decisions, sometimes you gain that trust. Or when we avoid those bad decisions independently of our parents, it can build that trust. But without those opportunities, it's sort of shifted dynamic. But I think it was interesting what you're talking about how adults are sort of going through the same things that we are, and how we're all sort of in this together, and this new all this new technology. And it can really be a good way for us to relate to each other. And I really think that's true.
Yeah. When you that segues perfectly. You're talking about, my generation is just one above you. Even just relating to your generation, I think that's one of the biggest, even just in the job that I have, it's just in the job that I have, I just want people to understand the abilities, the capabilities that you guys have and be able to relate to y'all and pour into y'all and invest in y'all. And so that kind of segues into my next question, which is, when it comes to older generations than you guys, what are maybe some misconceptions that you feel like there are that they kind of have about your generation, or maybe ways that your generation gets labeled that you feel like maybe aren't necessarily true?
I think we were talking about this earlier. I think like something that can go along the lines with that is like, obviously, with technology, I feel like if you notice, like if you look at like statistics, like in the past like 10 years, so many more teenagers have mental health issues. Like it just blew up out of the water. Like everyone just has, so many more mental health issues. And I feel like sometimes it's a lot harder for like older generations to understand, I think it goes hand in hand again with technology. I mean, like we said, like you don't have that in-person social like interaction, and it's so hard on yourself, and you're constantly comparing yourself to other girls and other boys, and it's kind of as society's standards are changing, it's like mental health issues are going out of the water, and it's so hard to like have older generations like to talk to them about that, because they didn't have that. And I've talked to my mom about that too. Like I'll be like, it's kind of crazy how like most of my friends, like they have some social like disorder, but she was like, that was so unheard of. When I was older, not many kids had that. And I feel like it's harder to relate to older generations because of that, I guess.
Yeah.
I think some parts of that is, what we're going through today as teenagers, and what you're talking about with all these maybe social disorders or just mental health struggles that people have. I think the world we live in today will expose those in adolescence much more easily than they would have before. Yeah. And maybe the misconception is that our struggles are not only our struggles, that the things that we're going through, people have gone through forever, as long as before our parents were even born, that people struggle with those things. And I think the world we live in is really just, it's exposed those things in a new way. And what you're talking about with, like people just get so addicted to these things, and people are just like stuck in their phones, and adults might say, oh, kids are just caring about these, shallow things, and we'll just take the phones away. Just pulling it out, just ripping off the Band-Aid might be the best way, but they might not understand how deeply invested these kids are, and maybe the proper way to help kids who are struggling with those things might be a different way of approaching it, as opposed to just looking at an issue that a kid might be having, or something they might be struggling with, and we'll just take it away. Like, it's not that big of a deal. They're fine. And something else about that, I think a great way for parents and kids to sort of reconcile those misconceptions is just to communicate better. And I think that's something that's also changed, because the way kids communicate, you were talking about texting and all these things, they don't communicate the way they used to. And we are actually, I think we're more particular with what we say sometimes. Yeah. Like, parents might say, oh, kids are just, they use so much colloquial, and they use YR for you, your, and they just, it's everything shorthand, and we're not really caring about what we say. But in a lot of ways, kids care more about what they say than people might have before. And when it comes to interacting with our parents, we might feel less, we're more scared to be completely honest with our parents about some things, because I think some parents might think kids don't look up to them as much as they might hope, but kids really do look up to their parents a lot, and they hold them in a really high regard. And that can unfortunately lead to kids not being as open with their parents as they might want to. And another thing is who kids. So as a kid becomes an adult, and just throughout their childhood, they're imitating what they see around them, and this goes to like the technology thing and everything. Kids are exposed to so much more than they had before, and before kids spent 90% of their time with their parents, and today they're spending almost that amount of time just on technology instead of with their parents. So I think in some ways it's sort of the parents' responsibility to to do those things, but again, they might not understand how much of an impact those things can have on kids. And so they aren't prepared to parent in the right way in those situations. And some are, and that's very good. But I think as we grow older, we'll have a better understanding of the obstacles that kids face in the 21st century. And perhaps we can do an even better job than our parents, which I have great parents. Toni, I know you have great parents too. And so many people we know, they have the best parents. And sometimes they just aren't familiar with those things. And we're sort of fending for ourselves on the web and all those things.
I want to end our time here. I want to touch on something that you said, and maybe y'all can both take a shot at answering this. And this is kind of how we'll wrap up. But you mentioned talking about communication with parents, which I myself am in agreement of that. Of just, and that's, for our student ministry here as well. It's we want to be a resource and that sort of deal to you guys, but also we're not the parents, right? Your parents are your parents, and so we want to continue to build that relationship. And so you mentioned when it comes to communication, there's kind of a fear there a little bit about communicating with your parents. Do you think that fear for teenagers comes from, I might not be understood, or they may not get it?
Yeah, I could definitely see how, because I feel like it just has to do with the way that technology is. I feel so, I think it's so easy to see the differences in how the generations react to certain things, and it's so hard for me sometimes and my mom to connect on that stuff, because I'll try and tell her about what I do with my friends versus what she would do with her friends, and I guess it's I don't know.
This sort of reminds me of something. I've been on the worship team here for a long time, and music has been a big part of my life. And I started with guitar and piano lessons when I was 4 or 5, so I'm very young. And we used something, it was called the Suzuki method. And basically, it's you're being taught music like it's a language, and it's a basic way of communicating for those students. And it sort of reminds me, the way I talk to someone about music who has only learned it at an older age, or 20 or 30, or someone who just learned it when they were in high school, they don't have the same perspective. And because I've been doing it from such a young age. And I feel like it's the same way with us with technology, because we learned it at such a young age when your brain is developing at such a high rate, and everything you're taking in is getting stored up in there. And it becomes the way we navigate the world and the way we communicate. So part of that fear of not being understood is because the way we communicate is so different. And also, if there is a fear, if your fear is that you won't be understood, your fear is also of what happens when you're not understood. And because that means that you really care what your parent thinks, just like you care what your friends think, even more so, because parents play such a huge role in our lives. We know that they'll be there with us forever. So that it shows, I think, if you're afraid of not being understood, for the parent, that can give insight to how much the kid really cares about what their parents think. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Guys, this is really good stuff. I appreciate both of you guys for being willing to sit down and have this conversation. I have a feeling this is one that I'm going to send to a lot of people. Really, really great conversation. So thank y'all a ton for being a part of it. And thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm going to invite you to tune back in next Sunday night at 7 p.m. We're going to have another roundtable. And we'd love to hear maybe what are some topics that you would like to hear a roundtable discussion on or to take part in. But you can email me at tyler.riley@faithbridge.org. I'd love to take those requests. But until then, I'll see you next Sunday night at 7 p.m. Have a great rest of your week.